announced that if we would all play and work well together, he would give us $2 million. And if we didn't, he was kicking us out of his beautiful chateau. So I thank Dr. Merieux for his wonderful job. We went back to Atlanta and once again illegally set up TEPHINET actually in government offices. And we were very fortunate to find that Victor Cardenas was available. So we hired him and we gave him an office and a secretary. And then, because we wanted him to be independent, we went away and left him to do whatever he would do. Oh, and we gave him a salary. So he rose to the occasion, and he really organized TEPHINET from nothing. It was very, very impressive. But it was also a lot of work. And he provided wonderful technical assistance, but there was a feeling that we needed more administrative support. The programs had a lot of technical expertise. So when he left, we hired an administrator, Jim Anderson, who's the husband of Rubina Imtiaz, who I think many of you know, who's now the head of the, I think, guinea worm program for the Carter Center, or for the task force for global health. And the most notable thing about Jim, who did a terrific job, was that Rubina wouldn't marry him unless he converted to Islam. So he did. So he really loved her. And I'm sure he loves Islam even today. Eventually, Jim got to be 71 years old, 1 year older than I am now. And so he retired. And so we got the board together and we interviewed a bunch of administrative types and hired a Canadian, John Orr, who was a hospital administrator. The most important thing about John Orr is he made the best martinis in the world. You know, other people are going to tell you about all the wonderful things people did. So I'm going to tell you the interesting things they did. And then after John came Dionisio. And by this time, we were in the task force for global development. It was for child survival back then. And once again, we interviewed a whole lot of people. And I was really impressed with Dionisio, partly because he had a global meeting in Spain, and I was providing a lot of money, but the last $50,000, I couldn't get it. It disappeared somewhere else. And so I called him up and I said, I'm so sorry, but we're 50,000 bucks short. And Dionisio said, not a problem, I'll round it up. And I thought, this is a guy I need to know because he makes things happen. And he did, as you know. He's one of the greatest dancers in the world. My wife, every year, has to dance with him at least once. And I've studied his dance steps. There's no way I'll ever do it. But Dionisio and his wife Candy, or I would stand with his wife Candy, and we would keep an eye on Shelley and Dionisio. I remember one day we were at a picnic together, and I told Dionisio, well, I used to raise $5 or $10 million for TEPHINET. Have you been able to keep that up? And he said, no, I'm raising $23 million. And now we have 60-some programs. And once again, I thought, wow, this is a guy I need to know. And he's been the director, as you know, for most of TEPHINET. And he has done a wonderful job. He's really Mr. TEPHINET. And if I'm one of the grandfathers of TEPHINET, he's the father still. So behave yourselves. So now on to the present. Global warming is the big existential threat to humanity, if you don't count Kim Un and Donald Trump. But if they don't blow up the world, climate change is going to do it for us. And those of you who are from Europe know that right now there's a terrible heat wave that people actually are calling Lucifero. Probably thousands of people are dying, will die, which was the case in the 2013 heat wave that hit Europe. Then again, I'm sure the Europeans have done a lot of planning, so it will be really interesting to see how it goes this time. There are climate change refugees right now. In Syria, there was a 4-year drought and famine before the civil war began. And I think it's very likely that the revolution began because life was intolerable. And of course, after that, many thousands of people left Syria to fleeing the violence and starvation and arrived in Europe, where they've really been welcomed. Not always with good grace, but who always has good grace? The problem is there are very likely going to be more floods of refugees, whether coming from India or Africa or the Mideast again, and there's no place to put them. And it's likely to be very terrible. Impossible choices, no place for them to come. Really terrible. I went to the alternate climate change conference that the Carter Center and Vice President Gore set up. And the morning was all this terrible stuff, but the afternoon was successes. And the guy who started out the afternoon said, all morning you've heard, eat your spinach and get a root canal. Now, we're going to, this afternoon, tell you the good news. And maybe we'll pass around plates full of certificates for vasectomies or sugar-free candy. But they never did. So now I'm going to tell you the good news. And the good news has to do with the fact that most of the improvements in global warming are not coming from national governments. They're coming at the state, province, and regional level. Places where field epidemiologists work. And the problem, and it's a big problem globally, it's one of the top 5, or air pollution is one of the top 5 causes of global loss of dollies. So it's a huge, major problem. And the solutions are with the governments and populations that you work with. And as you deal with the acute problems of air pollution and the thousands of people that it kills, the tens of thousands of emergency room visits, as you work to decrease these through, again, through your governments, this will also decrease the gases that cause global warming. So you can do good things for your population right now, and you can do well for the climate. So that should be good enough that you don't need condoms in things. Very quickly, I see Dionisio creeping up here. Some of the leaders in dealing with global warming, China has had a terrible problem, and they are now rising to deal with it. India's making big steps. So the rates of deaths due to global warming have gone way down since 1990, but the number of deaths have gone up primarily because the populations of China and India are aging and more susceptible. So what can we do? Following the example of Mount Pinatubo, we can do surveys acutely. Who needs blankets, who needs tents, who needs what food? So we can do that. Right now, you can go back, I expect you to go back, and work with your disaster planners to plan to have a plan in place for disasters, whether they're air pollution disasters or something else. You can evaluate interventions and advocate for the ones that work. And you will not only save your population from communicable diseases and a lot of non-communicable diseases and injuries, but you can work to save humanity and prevent these awful, the awful problem of the refugees. So thank you very much. March into the future. Revolt, revolt, resist, resist. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I now introduce the first director of TEPHINET, Dr. Victor Cardenas. Please, Victor.
Good afternoon. I'm very thankful, Dionisio and the members of the board of directors and the government of Thailand.